Should we as a human species try to be unique when it comes to ideas if there is no way to truly be unique? Should we base our creative idea off what we can bring to the table? I don't think that there is an answer to this question. It's up to the individual to decide. I mean, new ideas can only be presented once before being sent off into the machine where everybody else can leech off of it. It is especially apparent when talking about games as impactful as Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. It seems that everyone under the sun has given their take on these two games, and it looks like it's my turn. Now I could start this whole video off by giving the spiel everyone else does in their own videos, but I'm not going to. Originality was something that I wrestled with during the entire process of making this video, but ultimately nothing was going to stop me from talking about my favorite video game series, especially on its 35th anniversary. So that's the context for the existence of the video. I beat both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask within the span of 2 weeks, and the plan was to produce them both at around the same time. As soon as I finished Ocarina's script, I immediately moved to Majora. After completing it, however, 70% of the script was practically the same as Ocarina's. These two games are surprisingly similar. I have comparable critiques and praises with both games, so instead of an in-depth look at both of them individually, I will instead bring more of a surface-level analysis of the design in both games, comparing and contrasting them to one another in 3 of the 4 most important aspects to me in a Zelda game: the overworld, the side quests, and the dungeons. As for the story, they're both pretty good. I just don't see the need to discuss them since there isn't that much I can even say about them. So without further ado, let's get into the superficial fluff. These games are interesting when it comes to the visuals. They look pretty good, but also shockingly bad. The game's pushed the system to its limits, being locked at 20 frames per second and not even a consistent 20 frames per second. It truly is amazing that this game even runs at all. I generally think that they, particularly Majora's Mask, are some of the better looking N64 games, but it's not like that's saying much. The character models are, in my opinion, the best that Nintendo made for the system. But there is one problem with the visuals, and that is how they implemented the textures. Some of them look absolutely disgusting. Every texture is smeared across the surface of objects, and it's so bad I can't even tell what they're even supposed to represent. Ocarina's music is pretty good though. While it isn't my favorite soundtrack in the series, it is definitely up there. From the adventurous Hyrule Field theme to the calm Kakariko Village, there really isn't a single track that I dislike, although I don't really listen to them outside of the game. They're great in the moment, but the second I leave the area, I've already forgotten the melody because the memory capacity in my primitive ape mind is very small. Majora's soundtrack, on the other hand, is simply amazing. Sure, it shares a lot of tracks with Ocarina, and the overall theme is one of my least favorite in the series. I just don't really like this rendition of the main theme, but the rest is divine. The synths complement the strange and dark atmosphere perfectly. I particularly like the area themes since they easily convey that something is off. But the standout track and my second favorite piece of music Nintendo has ever written is the Song of Healing. It's comforting, it reminds me of 2020, but in a good way, and that's kind of what its gameplay purpose is. There's not much else I can say, I just really like it. Now onto the controls. First off, I need to mention my absolute hatred for the Nintendo 64 controller. It sucks. There isn't a single good thing that I can say about it. The 3-prong design gives it a distinct look, but it's just so unnecessary. But the biggest issue is the analog stick. I don't even need to explain why it sucks. Just look at it. This garbage stick isn't anywhere near as sensitive as later controllers, which means that if you're playing on anything other than an authentic console, it feels so vastly inferior. Not unplayable or anything, but it just doesn't feel right, especially with aiming, but I think that the footage speaks for itself. But even with authentic hardware, there's still a few issues that I have, especially with Z targeting in combat. The combat leaves a little to be desired. My best example of how tedious and boring the combat can be is to look at the Stalfos or the Wolfos. They guard so much that it really just becomes a game of wait for them to attack, then smack them, then shield. Every time you fight one, it just drags the pacing down. It's like this with pretty much every other enemy, just with a bit less waiting for them to open up. With Z targeting, I mean, yeah, the game won't always be able to know which enemy you'll want to lock onto, but sometimes it'll just recenter the camera. Overall, they're fine. They're probably the best the Nintendo 64 has to offer, which isn't really saying much for the system as a whole, but whatever. On to the overworld. If you ask me, the most important thing in an overworld is the content, and it's the area that both games struggle with the most. Let's start with Ocarina. The best way that I can explain how I feel about the distribution of the content throughout the game is to look at it like this. Hyrule Field is like Peach's castle, and all the locations are like the paintings. Looking at it like this, I can more easily explain how I think of it. First, we'll start with the field itself. There really isn't that much to do. There's a fence you can jump over, you can see a pole or two, the occasional P-head, and maybe even a golden Skulltula here and there, but there really isn't that much to do in the field itself, which makes traversal, particularly in the child portion of the game, a bit of a slog. But then you have the individual areas such as Kakariko Village, Zora's Domain, or Lake Hylia. These areas are pretty good, but they don't have as much content as they could. The main source of content comes from the time travel gimmick, but considering that this is Zelda, it's not like they use it all that well. The majority of content that comes from areas like Lake Hylia or Gerudo Valley isn't really that interesting since it can't be fully developed like Kakariko Village, since you only ever really visit them as an adult, and the content that is there as a child is the exact same as an adult. It also isn't spread evenly throughout these areas. I'll go through each location individually to explain what I mean. We'll start with the forest. Not only is it one of the best tutorials in gaming history, but it also has the Lost Woods, which apart from being a pretty fun puzzle to navigate, it also has a perfect size to content ratio. There's not really much to say, it's just solid. Moving on to the marketplace, there's hardly anything to do here as a child, even less to do in the adult section. The most amount of content is an incredibly easy stealth section where at the very end you have to arbitrarily wait a full 24 hours so that chicken can hatch, so you can wake up this guy here. There's also some mini games, but I'll get to those later down the line. Kakariko Village is probably the most content-rich area of the game, and by that I'm talking about the size to content ratio. There's the village itself, where you have to find a bunch of cuckoos, but I'll talk about that in the side quest section, because it's a side quest. There's a whole mini dungeon that's like 90% optional. There's also the graveyard, which we'll discuss for a second. First, there's the Music Brothers tomb, which is probably the most creepy place in the game. Yeah, it disturbs you more than the well and this thing. Then you can get the hook shot and a heart piece from Donpei's grave in a really dumb and stupid and dumb and anti-existence piece of trash race. And there's even a Poe, which I accidentally drank. Then there's like Hylia, which has it has the water temple and fishing, but fishing sucks. Lon Lon Ranch really only has the race to get Epona, but at least it makes the big size a bit easier to swallow. Gerudo Valley has a lot of content, but most of it is mediocre. There's a few heart pieces and a Skulltula to find on one side of the bridge, and it's what I would consider the fun side. But on the other side, where the majority of the content actually is, it's fine, I guess. There's the Thieves' Hideout, which is basic and repetitive, especially since every single worker literally says the exact same thing, which is really dumb and annoying. There's also a mini dungeon, which I always forget about, and it's okay, I guess, but there isn't much to say about it, hence why it's not really in the script. In my opinion, Majora struggles much more with content than Ocarina. There are 6 major areas in the game: Clocktown, Termina Field, the Swamp, the Mountains, Great Bay, and Icona Valley. So let's look at each area and see what it has to offer. First, there's a swamp. It's split up into 2 unfulfilling sections. There's the first section that has a tourist shop where you can get on a boat, the witch's hut where you can buy potions, and what is easily the worst Lost Woods in the entire series. First of all, it's really small and there aren't any secrets to uncover. But that isn't what really bugs me. What bugs me is the navigation. In Ocarina of Time, navigating the Lost Woods was about paying attention to the volume of the music. In this game, however, you need to follow a monkey. And they try to make it a bit more challenging to follow by having him go to one entrance, then quickly swivel around to a different one. That doesn't take a brain, it just takes waiting around for it. It's so easy that if they had a good enough function in their limbs, a fetus could do it. Your best bet is to just use an online map since it saves about 20 seconds. That's all for the first half, but what about the second half? There's the Deku Palace, which has a decent stealth section, a Deku race that is literally just the reskinned Donpei race, the entrance to the temple, which is really annoying to navigate, and a Skulltula house. The mountain is way worse than the swamp somehow. There's the mountain village, which has this wall, and a lonely shack that's used for upgrading your sword. Then there's this obnoxious path that you have to go back and forth on so many times that just hurts my soul. Once you get to the Goron village, there really isn't anything to actually do. The story quest is far more boring than Swamp 2. Great Bay is a vast pit of nothingness. There's another Skulltula house, the Pirate's Fortress, which I'll get into later, this pit of eels that takes 5 million years to get through, and Zora's Hall, which is just to show, hey, the Zoras have a location that they live in too. And Icona Valley has the graveyard, which has the Skull Key to fight, and a couple of graves that lead to the small underground caverns, the town, which has nothing, and Icona Castle. There's just less and less to each area as you go on. Finally, there's Clock Town, which is really simple, but it doesn't rely on the main story as much as the other areas. There's a sense of community there that's lacking in the rest of the areas, which makes these side quests a lot more interesting. But one solid area doesn't make up for the rest of the game. However, this is where the atmosphere comes in. Each area is struggling with a problem, both at large and personally. In the swamp, an innocent monkey is going to be punished for the kidnapping of the princess, and the waters have been poisoned. In the mountain, the Gorons are all going to freeze to death, and their hero died trying to enter the temple, and the elder's son is crying with his father nowhere to be seen. In the Great Bay, all the Zora eggs have been lost or stolen, and the waters are murky, I guess. In Icona Valley, there's a little girl whose father has been transformed into a Gibdo, and there are monsters surrounding the entire village. And with the exception of the swamp, you play the Song of Healing, which soothes the soul of these hurting people, and they, in turn, provide you with a mask required for progression. Which leads us to... I have nowhere else to really fit this in, but I wanted to talk about the companions to Link. Let's start with Navi. I do not think she is nearly as insufferable as people tend to depict her. First of all, the only time she's ever annoyed me is when she says that there are wall masters. The first time it's nice since the player hasn't come across these enemies yet, but she says it in every room that has them, which really ruins the pacing. Everything else I can excuse because this was a new kind of game and she was just helping players get to grasp with what on earth they were even supposed to be doing. And she also doesn't interrupt so often that I want to rip my hair out. But comparing Navi to Tattle, it's a clear improvement. Instead of speaking English words to get your attention, she just chimes, which is fairly easy to ignore. She also has a personality and a slight character arc, which makes her more compelling than Navi ever was. Everything else that I said about Navi applies to Tattle. As for the progression itself, I should probably explain how I would interpret it. I'm talking about two things in particular. How handholdy is the game and how much depth do the items add when exploring? One of these games does a much better job at this than the other. To answer this question for Ocarina is surprisingly hard. On the one hand, the game tells you what you're supposed to do 90% of the time so that you never get lost, which could be considered pretty handholdy. But then there's the other 10%, like with Jabu Jabu or getting the fire arrows, which is so inconspicuous that you wonder how anyone has even beat the game. That 10% shouldn't even be there when for the rest of the game you knew exactly what to do and when to do it. As for the items, they unfortunately don't really change up your exploring, which is probably the main reason that the overworld feels underwhelming. You hardly use your items. I mean, you use the hookshot quite a bit, but it's the first item that you obtain as an adult, so it's what sets the base depthness. And no, I don't care that depthness isn't a real word. You get the bow second, but it really isn't used that much outside of dungeons into combat. The hammer, which I'll complain about later, the iron boots, which are used like twice in the overworld, and after the water temple you don't ever really use them again. Then you get the long shot, which is just a farther reaching hookshot. Wow, I bet you would never guess that based on the name long shot. Then you get the lens of truth, which sees hardly any use, the hover boots, and what I have to say about them is what I had to say about the iron boots. Then you get the silver gauntlets, which see hardly any use, the mirror shield, which is great for mirror puzzles, but it's only used in its dungeon, and finally there are the golden gauntlets, which are found in the final dungeon, and you use it twice in the whole game. Once for a defense boost from the Great Fairy, and once to access a room in the dungeon. Truly amazing. Majora's Mask is so much better than its predecessor. It is, in my opinion, the biggest improvement over Ocarina. The game tells you that you need to head north, south, east, or west. That's it. Once you get there, you need to figure out where to go and what to do, every step of the way. It's all about exploring the area and seeing if your items can help you progress. The whole game is about exploration, really. The items are used a lot more, and it's mostly because there are less of them. And outside of the bow and arrows, you get all of them in the overworld. So the items are designed with each area in mind, and then on top of all that, you get the masks, which add an interesting mix to the gameplay. However, only the transformation masks are utilized well. Each of the dungeons and overworld areas use the abilities of the masks pretty well. The rest of the masks are used to get a heart piece or some other reward, and some, like the Gorman Troop masks, don't even have a practical use. I mean, it makes the bandits not attack you, but they're already pathetically easy, and you have to do this before you get the mask that makes it easier, so yeah, it's pretty useless. I don't have anything else to say other than that. They're fun to collect, but are pretty meaningless otherwise. Before we moved on to the next section, I wanted to talk about the collectibles. To me, it's very important that there are multiple things to look for throughout the game, because if I decide to stop looking for one, then there'll still be something for me to look for. Now when it comes to these specific items, there are two important aspects: a satisfying reward and a satisfying collection process. Ocarina tries to do this, but I only really care about two of the three. So with all that in mind, let's talk about the pull souls first. First of all, the reward isn't really all that good. I mean, it's just a bottle, and there are plenty more interesting and fun ways to get bottles that don't involve pose. But the main problem for me lies in the collection process. There are only 10, but you have to fight them like an enemy out in the overworld, and it doesn't really feel fun to hunt them all down. And I drank one on accident, so I'm legally required to despise them. The golden Skulltulas are pretty much the exact opposite of pose. They're more fun to passively correct rather than going out of your way to kill them all. They also give you a really bad reward for saving all 100, but the rewards that they do give you for the first 50 that you destroy are pretty good. The ones that are the most fun to collect are the ones that are in the dungeons, but the ones in the overworld are still fun. And yeah, there are a few cryptic ones, but you can so easily ignore those ones that I really don't see the big deal about them. And just because some people are tryhards doesn't really mean that it should reflect the actual quality of the collection process. I feel the same way about Koroks in Breath of the Wild. Then there are heart pieces, and they're decently fun to look for. Some are right out in the open, and you just need to figure out how to actually acquire them. Some are a bit more hidden, and are usually behind a minigame or small obstacle. Majora is definitely a bit better in this regard. The Skulltulas have been relegated to these Skulltula houses. Personally, I vastly prefer how they were handled in the previous game. If there was one house in every location, I might have had a different opinion, but there are only two in the whole game. However, I do really enjoy them for the most part. The Swamp House is a bit more irritating since you don't have the hookshot yet, meaning that you need to have magic beans and a whole lot of patience when the Skulltula is just out of range. The Great Bay House has some pretty dumb ones as well, where you need to aim in these small crevices. Outside of these houses, there are two other major collectibles, both of which are very fun to find. First are the masks, which I already talked about. The second are the stray fairies found in dungeons. They're a lot of fun to find, and they make the dungeons feel more complete. I also like how there are only 15 in each dungeon. Any more would feel like padding, honestly. The rewards are also pretty good, and they make going out of your way to find them less frustrating. The only problem is that some are ridiculously stupid, like this one in Snowhead. It's the first fairy that you find in the dungeon, and with the aiming issues, it took half an hour to get. I spent a half an hour obtaining it. Why is it so ridiculous? That's all I have to say about the progression. On to the side quests. The side quests in Ocarina are fine, but nothing too amazing. So there's this one with cuckoos and you have to bring them to this one person or whatever, I was talking about it earlier. I would consider this a side quest because you got a bottle out of the ordeal, so now I can whine about it. Getting the first few are relatively easy, but in order to get the last you need to do this mad trick. At least that's the only way I can do it with my primitive ape mind. Then there's the mask quest, which is honestly pretty forgettable, as in I forgot to do it until I got to the well. That says it all, really. Honestly, a lot of the complaints are unjustified in my opinion. It's pretty obvious who you're supposed to give the masks to. The skull mask's description and name make it pretty obvious he goes to the skull kid if you speak to him, same for the kid in the graveyard. The only one that's kind of what the heck am I even supposed to do is the bunny hood, because there's a very small chance you'll see the guy you're supposed to give it to. Then there's the Bigoron sword, which is really just meh. It's the beginning of the dreaded trading sequence in Zelda games. I mean, does anyone even like these? There are really two problems with this quest in particular. Trying to find which person you're supposed to give the item to, and the time limit on some items. You first need to find a very lazy person, which requires entering and exiting a series of houses, assuming you don't already know which house you need to enter, and assuming you don't know who you're supposed to wake up, and assuming that you're supposed to know that the person is in Kakariko Village to begin with. Then you acquire the depressed cuckoo Kojiro. You aren't given any hints as to the fact that the person you're supposed to give it to is in the Lost Woods. At least when you give the person that, he tells you that you need to go back to Kakariko, but there's a new problem now, the time limit. I honestly don't see the purpose of having one other than to waste your time, oddly enough. You can warp to any locations, because then it will be over too quickly, I guess. So you have to run across Hyrule to get to your next location. And up until the very last one, the time is pretty generous, so it's not like it introduces stress and challenge, just annoyance. Then there's the poacher saw, which makes me want to commit die since there's a glitch in the game that makes it actually impossible to fully 100% the game, which is very, very dumb. Anyway, you somehow just have to know that you need to go to Gerudo Valley to get it. but you're also given directions as to where you're supposed to go, and there's no time limit with the item that you get after that. Then you go to give the prescription to King Zora, who then sends you to Lake Hylia to deliver a frog, where the timer is only strict if Epona doesn't jump over the fence, but it isn't too bad. But then after you give him the frog, you have the most garbage part of the whole quest. You only have 4 minutes to not only cross Hyrule Field, but to scale Death Mountain too, and this one piece of trash Tektite is only here so that he can ruin your life and force you to restart. And if that wasn't bad enough, you don't even get the sword immediately, you have to wait a few days. The reward does kinda make up for the rest of the quest, being twice as powerful as the Master Sword, but is that really worth all the pain you had to go through to get it? There are way too many good side quests to talk about regarding Majora, so I'll give a general overview of them instead. They are fantastic, easily the best in the entire series. They really aren't about the quests themselves or the characters, it's about the world and atmosphere. Seeing these polygonal chunks of mass react to their own mortality as the moon slowly crashes into Termina really sets the mood that no other Nintendo game ever has. But then there's the quest you can do to upgrade your sword. In order to do it, you need to compete in this stupid and dumb Goron race. The AI constantly rubber bands and they cut you off. It isn't a fun or fair kind of challenge, it's just unfair garbage for the sake of unfair garbage like Super Mario Kart on the SNES. And you know that something is bad if I am comparing it to Super Mario Kart on the SNES unironically. That's really all I have to say about them, everybody already knows how good they are. And now onto the meat and potatoes of the entire video. The dungeons. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to the dungeons. In my opinion, they are the most important aspect of any Zelda game, to the point where most of my feelings on a game lie in the quality of the dungeons. And one of these games is clearly better than the other in this department. As usual, let's start with Ocarina. Inside the Deku Tree is one of the better first dungeons in the Zelda series. It teaches you the mechanics of how every dungeon from here on out will function, from how you progress to the types of puzzles that you'll be doing. It's also pretty short, which in turn makes the opening mercifully short, considering that you can finish it within the first 10 minutes of the game. Dodongo's Cavern is easily the best dungeon from the child section of the game. It's slightly more complex with a series of perceived pathways, but the way forward is fairly obvious, but not so obvious like in the last one. In the central room, you'll have to actually explore to find the only path forward. The only real problem with the dungeon is that the enemies are kind of annoying, like the Beamos. They're easy enough to avoid, but the fact that they can only be killed by using a bomb makes killing them a lot more vexatious. And then there's the Dodongos, the enemy that the dungeon is named after, and they are incredibly aggravating. Their only weak point is their tail, which is fine, but they never stop spinning, which makes attacking them so annoying that I want to cry in the shower. Then there's the Zolfos, which aren't that bad in the adult section of the game, but here they're a bit too fidgety. They don't stop jumping around from platform to platform, which makes this one encounter last a bit too long for my liking. Jabu Jabu's belly is visually the most interesting dungeon in the game. Everything is pink and nasty, and it really feels like you're in the stomach of a great beast. Even his mouth is a stomach. But that's really the only good thing I can say about it, because this is probably my least favorite dungeon in the game, right alongside the Shadow Temple, which I'll get to later. The first major problem is that it just doesn't know when to end. By the time you get to the mini-boss, there's hardly any dungeon left after that. You fight the real boss practically immediately after the mini-boss. There's only a couple of rooms in between the two. And for some reason, it's incredibly linear and straightforward until you get to this hallway area, which is incredibly disorienting and I can never tell where the heck I'm even supposed to go. And the puzzles in this dungeon aren't even that interesting. But the mini-boss of this dungeon is straight up awful. This one stupid Octorok is probably the hardest boss in the entire game, and no, I am not joking. You have to be unreasonably close to him to hit him with the boomerang, and so you'll spend most of the time walking around in a circle slowly, catching up to him just so you can do microscopic amounts of damage. It's just a clumsy, drawn-out piece of trash. The Forest Temple is where things start getting actually good. This is the first dungeon which introduces locked doors and keys. The main feature here is you can collect multiple keys before unlocking this first door, so if you miss any, you'll need to backtrack. It's a small thing, but it makes it feel a lot more labyrinthian. The puzzles here are also really good, particularly the individual room puzzles which use spatial awareness pretty well, like this Pock puzzle. It's one of the only good ones in the entire series because it isn't about moving it into the correct position, it's about how you move it into that position. Then there's a twisted hallway which makes you think differently about the room beyond once you straighten it out. It isn't nearly as complicated as Puzzle Box Dungeon, but it has a lot of good elements from Puzzle Box Dungeons. Unfortunately, there's one kind of major issue that I have with it that makes me not enjoy it as much, and that's the pose. I already complained about the pose in the Overworld section, but it's a different problem this time. There's this first one in the painting, and you have to position yourself in such a way so that you don't scare off the Poe into one of the other paintings, but can still shoot it. The second one is literally a mirror image of the first one, so they both kind of cancel out on an otherwise solid idea. The third one is really irritating since you have a certain amount of time to move all the blocks into the correct position, and since moving them is so slow, it means that there's a pretty good chance that they'll all flip over before you have a chance to line them up, and you'll have to completely restart. The fourth one is pretty fun, seeing which one spins and then attacking it makes for a more interesting fight compared to the other ones, but it still isn't anything amazing. The other problem with them is that once you free them, in a sense, the strategy doesn't ever change. It's still the exact same fight. You back them up into a corner, guard, and then attack. Rinse and repeat until dead. It's definitely a fun dungeon, but it's lowered in my eyes because of the ending section. The Fire Temple is okay, I guess. It's a lot better than Dodongo's Cavern, but that really isn't saying much. The main idea of the dungeon is that you need to rescue the Gorons, which is an idea that I really like. It makes the player feel like they are actively doing something to set the world right again. But the progression isn't as well paced as some of the other dungeons in the game. Firstly, it feels more linear than the Forest Temple, and while both are equally linear, Nintendo disguised that by backtracking in the Forest Temple. In the Fire Temple, you don't really backtrack into previous rooms, and the one time that you do, it's more for a shortcut, rather than needing to do it to progress to a further room that you couldn't before. You're also led to that path instead of deciding, hey, I need more keys, perhaps I should go check that other area and see if I missed anything. I mean, yeah, backtracking to the beginning of the dungeon is pretty nifty, but after that point, there's no reason to go back to previous rooms. Another problem with the dungeon is the key item. I saved the Megaton Hammer here because I felt that it negatively affects the dungeon and it didn't really make sense to talk about during the progression. Not only does it get hardly any use, and not just out in the overworld, but in the dungeon itself, but doesn't even feel like it would fill a specific need the player has. The bow allows for hitting faraway switches and aerial combat. The hookshot allows you to cross longer gaps. The hover boots extend your jump. The gauntlets let you pick up heavier objects, etc. The hammer doesn't really fill a need like that. You can press down rusty switches, but at that point you might as well have had the doors that they open be locked, or have a block pushing puzzle in the room. They can clear these pillars in the entrance, but the gauntlets already allow you to do that and in a much more convenient way. The hammer literally serves no purpose in existing. The Ice Cavern is a decent mini dungeon. The only real point in its existence is to introduce the iron boots. What joy. The enemies are really annoying and the rooms kind of feel uninspired. Like they wanted the long shot to be in the dungeon item in the water temple, but they needed you to get the iron boots, and you can't get them all willy-nilly now, can you? I normally like sliding block puzzles on ice, but there's just something about this one that irks me and I have no idea why. The Water Temple is obviously the best dungeon in the game, but also unobviously the worst dungeon in the game. The Water Temple is all about thinking about how you change the dungeon, from how you'll traverse it to which rooms you can or can't access, and all this requires you to explore. However, the Iron Boots clash with this idea of exploration. You need to pause the game, go to the equipment screen, go down to the boots, put them on, then unpause. After counting every individual frame that I had to do this, it came out to be 7.5 minutes of being just in the menu. That is 7.5 minutes of my life that I just wasted. That one issue really does ruin the dungeon, and I am so happy that they changed it in the 3DS remake. The actual design of the dungeon is really good. The puzzles aren't too difficult to figure out, but the big puzzle is the navigation, an idea that every other dungeon in the game merely toys with. The level of intentionality that is required of the player just makes this dungeon so much more fun, which is why it's such a shame that the Iron Boots bring the experience down so much. Also, Darkleg sucks. He's so laughably easy, you just spam him with Din's Fire and smack him with the Bigron Sword a couple times. Hey, at least the room looks pretty cool. The bottom of the well is disturbing, to say the least. It's mostly just an open room with a few branching paths here and there. There are literally no puzzles, and I say this due to the overuse of the Triforce symbol to denote when to play Zelda's Lullaby. But because it's so short, I honestly don't mind too much. This place is all about the atmosphere. The music is chilling, and the skeletons decorated around are chilling. I was too lazy to use a thesaurus. The highlight of this mini dungeon is, of course, the Dead Hand. This abomination that I would assume is just an early testing model that was so creepy that the devs just had to put it in there. It's just a visual feast. The way in which it moves and its mouth, I mean, you just can't look away. As for the fight itself, it's laughably easy. You just stand there, get picked up by a hand, break free, smack him, rinse and repeat until dead. The Shadow Temple is my least favorite dungeon in the game, right alongside Jabu Jabu's belly. Much like Jabu Jabu, I love the creepier atmosphere and the music. It isn't quite as good as Jabu Jabu, but it still is pretty good. Unfortunately, I really couldn't care less about aesthetics because the dungeon is just so boring. I like the puzzles, they're ultimately what make or break a dungeon for me. Even if it's really obvious what to do, I don't care. I just like feeling smart. And the Shadow Temple lacks any good puzzles. They're all really easy and so obvious to the point where it almost feels like there's a neon sign spelling everything out to you. So if a dungeon doesn't have any good puzzles, that leaves it up to the progression as the key thing holding up the quality of the dungeon. And the Shadow Temple is literally a straight line. By the time you get to the boat is when I would like the dungeon to end, but no, it stays for like another 20 minutes, which means that it's shower time. The Spirit Temple is the only dungeon in the entire game to utilize both Child Link and Adult Link, but it doesn't really do much with that concept. You just finish the first half as a child and the second half as an adult. It feels disconnected. If you went through the exact same rooms with both runs, but you'd grab different ledges and fight different enemies or whatever, then this would probably be my favorite dungeon in the game. But instead of focusing on what this dungeon isn't, let's focus on what it is, and what it is a really solid dungeon. The child portion is fairly easy, the puzzles aren't too taxing, but the end is a real highlight. You need to face an iron knuckle, which is pretty difficult, and it's also one of the only fun fights in the game. The adult section is far superior to the child portion, so much that it's probably my favorite section in the entire game. The mirror puzzles are so much fun to figure out, not only in how you reflect light onto the surface, but also how you're going to get light into the room. It easily has the best puzzles in the entire game. And I really like how you have to face off against an iron knuckle as an adult, a mirror to the ending of the child section. It's also a pretty good way of making you feel powerful since it's a lot easier to defeat during this section. And finally, there's Ganon's Castle, which is one of the best final dungeons in the entire series. It starts off relatively non-linear. You can choose which door you want to go into, and each room is based off of a previous dungeon that you've cleared. The individual rooms are fun 5-minute gauntlets, though some are more fun than the others. I hate the fire room and forest room, both of them vastly outstay their welcome, and the challenge just really isn't that interesting to begin with. Majora's Mask has a set of really good dungeons and a decent set of mini dungeons. Woodfall Temple is the weakest dungeon in the game. It's the most comparable with the Fire Temple in terms of quality, but I'm more inclined to forgive this dungeon since it's the first one in the game. There really isn't much else to say, so I'll move on. Snowhead is a fantastic dungeon. Navigation isn't the only puzzle since you can also manipulate the dungeon to some degree by lowering this platform. It really tests your spatial awareness, making you look at where you need to go on your map and at the room to see how you're going to get there, and it can be said of the other two as well. The puzzles revolving around your Goron form are pretty satisfying to figure out, particularly this one where you need to figure out which order to press the switches. The only thing I don't really like about this dungeon are the enemies. I don't know why the ice dungeons in Zelda games usually have the most annoying enemies in the entire game, but it's a tradition that I really don't like. The Pirate Fortress, when not using the stone mask, is a solid step up from the Thieves' Hideout, but since I always come with a stone mask, it's just a complete joke. It utilizes the hookshot fairly well, but there really is not much to say about it otherwise. It's really repetitive like Thieves' Hideout, but instead of saving the workers, it's saving Zora eggs. You have to fight every Gerudo warrior and it's the same fight every time. And if you don't have enough bottles, then you have to come here multiple times and that's never fun. Great Bay Temple used to be my all-time favorite dungeon, but that was before I replayed Stone Tower with a more critical mindset. The idea of changing the direction of the current is such a creative idea for a water dungeon. Raising and lowering the water and sending water down a stairway are both good ideas, but they also are really obvious. And unlike Stone Tower or Snowhead, changing the direction never feels like it breaks the pacing of the dungeon. Now it does have some issues, but they're with the mini-bosses, so I'll touch on that later. There's not really that much else to say, it's just really solid. Iconic Castle feels like it was going to be an actual dungeon that just wasn't finished on time. It feels like Shadow Temple, but done right. It isn't just atmosphere with no substance. But it's also not really remarkable in any way. There's not much I can say about it. It's fine, but that's about it. And finally, Stone Tower Temple. This is my new favorite dungeon in the series. I didn't like it as much as Great Bay up until now because of the Elegy of Emptiness. Like, I love the song, I think it's beautiful, but having to play it over and over again makes me feel like the statues, a soulless husk of myself. But then you get into the dungeon itself, and it's just so clever. The puzzles are fantastic and are the best in any Zelda game. And because the layout has to account for also being upside down, it makes observation even more important and rewarding than in any other dungeon. It also makes the layout a lot more confusing, which makes getting lost in it and trying to solve it really fun. It's just a brilliant dungeon overall. The bosses are hit or miss in both games. It doesn't really help that I'm not the biggest fan of the bosses in Zelda games, since 9 out of 10 times they're kind of low point in the game, but I was honestly kind of surprised that I had this much to say about them, all things considered. There really isn't a reason to talk about Goma, since she's so pathetically easy you can beat her in under a minute. The second boss may take a bit more time, but if anything, he's easier since you don't even have to Z-target him. You just throw bombs into his mouth and hold R for the rest of the match. Then you have whatever this thing is, and it's the only good boss that you face as a child, but there really isn't anything noteworthy to say about it. It's fun and it uses the key item well. As you can see, the bosses in the child portion of the game are not fun, but what about the adult portion? First up is Phantom Ganon, and he's just too easy. You stand in the corner, wait for him to appear in the painting that you're aiming at, rinse and repeat until you get to phase 2. His lightning attack can never even touch you if you stand in the corner, and he will eventually show up in the painting you're looking at, so there's really no point in actually trying for the first phase. Then there's phase 2, which just outstays its welcome. So long as you have enough arrows, you can just stand there and wait for the energy ball to come over to you. The rays also get in the way of seeing, which is dumb and annoying. Volvage is a lot more fun to fight compared to the previous bosses. While his attacks are really easy to avoid, actually attacking him is surprisingly satisfying. He's just a good boss. Following up, one of the best bosses in the game is Morpha, who is not only one of the worst bosses in the entire game, but it's one of the worst bosses in the entire series. He's a terrible cap off to the water temple. It's incredibly tedious, and its attacks are always the same, its strategies are always the same, the ways in which you attack it are always the same. The only thing that changes over the course of the fight is that it gets more water tentacle thingies. I mean, you can tell when a boss is actual garbage when you are more relieved when you defeat a boss than satisfied. And that's how I feel after beating Morpha. There's a correlation between Bongo Bongo being a fun boss and not having the hover boots equipped. I honestly don't get why so many people equip those, but whatever. There's not really much to say about him other than he's fun, so moving on to the Twin Rova Sisters. The Twin Rova Sisters just blast every other boss that came before into oblivion because this is one of the most fun bosses in the entire series. It utilizes the mirror shield really well. The first phase can be a bit annoying when one of them is shooting a beam at you and the other one isn't in range in time to hit them, but who cares about that because phase 2 is an absolute blast. Dodging their attacks and charging your shield and letting her rip, and it's just so satisfying. Not much else to say other than that. And finally, there's the Ganon fight, the one that I have the most to say about, so let's get started. Phase 1 is just Phantom Ganon Phase 2, but with some improvements that make it a bit more fun. First off, not being able to Z-target him is not as big of a deal as the game tries to make it out to be, but it does mean that instead of pressing a button and letting the game do the work for you, you'll have to position yourself so you can hit the ball back to him. There's also the fact that the floor collapses over the fight, and so you'll have to be on the move more than in the Phantom fight. Although there is one small annoyance that I have with the fight, and that's actually jumping over the platform to damage him. You have to jump over from a very specific spot or else you'll fall down into the bottom and have to climb up. And screw the developer who decided the only place to climb up is the center platform, which is where Ganondorf is. Next, you have the technically second phase where you need to escape the crumbling castle. It's not particularly difficult, although you do have to fight some stealth foes, so enjoy. What this section is, though, is the short burst of excitement before the finale. The final fight with Ganon has an awesome atmosphere. Everything is dark and brown, he towers above you, his design is just cool, and even cooler silhouetted against the sky. Then there's that feeling of it being really overpowered since you can no longer use the Master Sword, unless you went out of your way to get the bigger sword, but unfortunately it is kind of easy. You just quickly get behind him, smack his tail, then jump out of the way of his attacks. It isn't really that hard. Well, you do have to use the Master Sword to do the final blow. If you use the bigger sword, then you're basically soft locked with him because you're just trapped in the arena with him. Majora's Mask's main bosses are fine overall. There are a couple of bangers in there, but most of them are duds, either being way too annoying or way too boring. Odawa is easily my favorite boss in the game, which is a bit of a shame considering he's the first boss you face. He has a variety of attacks, ranging from summoning hordes of enemies to creating a firewall, and since there's no set strategy to damaging him, you can use any tool in your arsenal. The knowledge remains fast-paced and exhilarating throughout. Goat is a bit overrated in my opinion. It's still fun for the most part, but it's hard to not feel like you're just wandering around a circle whenever you're not damaging him. Gyorg is easily the worst boss in the game, and if it wasn't for the 3DS remake, I would consider him to be my least favorite boss in the entire series. Morpho was boring, but Gyorg is just aggravating. Similarly to Morpho, the fight never really evolves, but it isn't as mindless as Morpho. You have to concentrate on him. Also, my footage of the fight got corrupted, so I had to go back and refine it for a 10-second section of the video in my life. The Iconic King is alright. You first fight his 2 henchmen, then afterwards you fight him. It's the exact same fight pretty much all 3 times, but he is a bit stronger, so it's a different enough experience that I don't really mind too much. Plus, the ending bit with the 2 bickering is hysterical, makes the whole battle worth it. Twin Mold is pretty solid. I think that the Giant Smacks makes it pretty satisfying. After 1 terrible and 2 mediocre bosses that you had to fight, you finally just get to wail on one, and it's pretty fun. Similarly to Gyorg, the fight never evolves, it remains the same throughout. Unlike Gyorg though, the base fight is fun, so that's all that really matters. Before getting to Majora, there are mini bosses to talk about, and I took the vaguest notes possible, so there's a good chance that I forgot some. Now, as a lover of all things frog, trust me when I say the frog bosses are not that good. They're both dreadfully boring, in the case of the one in the Great Bay Temple, incredibly irritating as well. There isn't a lot to say about them. There's a shadow guy in the Stone Tower Temple, and aesthetically he's one of the coolest bosses in Zelda history, just look at him. Unfortunately, the fight is very boring and lacks evolution. There's also Stalkita, who's so laughably easy. I mean, just look at this. And people complain about the 3DS version. Finally, you have the most iconic mini-boss in the entire game, possibly even series as a whole, the Wizrobe. For some reason, the designers love this fight. He is just as bad as Boom Boom in that regard. And no one wants to be compared to Boom Boom. Strategy never changes. Be a Goron. Roll towards the dot on the map. Fire punch him. Rinse and repeat. If he's on a ledge, you can quickly and easily shoot him with an arrow and then become a Goron again as soon as the damage animation is over. Finally, we have Majora, who is either a fantastic finale to the game or a really anticlimactic finale to the game. On the one hand, his attacks are fun to dodge, his design is creepy, and it's just a solid fight. But on the other hand, you have God Mode, which is why I don't have as much to say about Majora as I did Ganon. I literally haven't beaten without the Fierce Stadium mask since my first playthrough back in 2017. It's just so easy since I always go for all the masks. You can just log on to him and spam B. You can still get hurt, but not if you're really dumb like me. And when you have the power to be a god with 0 consequences, it's really hard to go back to beating Majora legitimately. Both of these games are deeply flawed. Ocarina doesn't spread its content evenly throughout the overworld, the side quests are awfully bland, and its dungeons just aren't that challenging or engaging. Majora's Overworld has no meaningful content outside of Clocktown, and everything is pretty one-note. However, despite that, I still love both of these games. That adventurous feeling with wonder and exploration is strong with both entries. In Majora, the locations are some of the most interesting in the entire series, and the dungeons and side quests are amazing. And Ocarina of Time shaped what the series would become, for better or worse. Neither of them are my favorite because their issues are far too abundant. However, I would call Majora a near-perfect Zelda game, since its good stuff far outweighs its bad stuff, and Ocarina is a good Zelda game. Next time, I would like to take a look at the Wind Waker and discuss why I personally think it's the weakest 3D Zelda. Yes, weaker than Skyward Sword. Hope to see you then. Insert generic YouTuber stuff, and bye.